After all, after all the tigers have nowhere left to roam or hunt, they then become a menace and can be removed without a trace of guilt. After all the rhinos have stubbornly given up their lovely ivory horns, Oriental men will have to find another way to attain their magical erections. After all, the elephants must be bred only in captivity. Bull sperm will be harvested mechanically and the musty creatures drugged. After all the relevant decision-making is done by God-fearing neocons, we can search with lights in daytime for what they left behind as worthy of conserving. After everyone has all the guns they need but little food and there are no jobs, then it's time to send out our drug child soldiers to clean up the countryside. After all the pigs and cows and chickens are manufactured like Chinese TV sets, at least this absurd and disgusting state has left our sanctimonious morality intact. After all the old growth trees are cut and shipped off overseas, there will be no logging jobs left and no reasons for tourists to visit or to spend. After all the mighty tuna have vanished from the bluest ocean depths, we can try to convince ourselves that in God's plan there is no need to miss them. After all our cows are made safe from natural predators on federal lands, we can clone them even stupider, fatten them even faster, and sell them even cheaper. After all the salmon are raised in filthy pens using colors chosen off of salesman paint chips, they will be better suited for packaging in modern plastics beneath the bright lights of supermarkets. After all the solitary orangutans have no more deep forest refuges, they must adapt to any zoo lives that we might care to give them. After all the rivers are simply grimy, stinking channels for our waste and toxic runoff, we are surely safe from disruptive floods until the end of our time. After all the wild grizzlies run out of places they can dominate alone, we will save just their genes, for they will not tolerate lives of captivity. After all the ice melts for good and seals always surface in open water, the polar bears can sit wasting away quietly on the shore for a while. After all the trout caught come dumped straight from hatchery trucks, all the remaining so-called anglers get all the adventure that they deserve. After all the jaguars lose their territories to slashing and burning urban refugees, it's simply poison not to drain and settle the rest of their one-time jungle. After all the mountain valleys are accessible by wheelchairs, ATVs, and dirt bikes, we really should bid out themed strip malls at the end of every trail. After all the songbirds have been mysteriously gone for many years, loud mufflers may be a comfort in a new and strange and uncomfortable silence. After all the frogs stop their friendly croaking during summer evenings, we will shortly realize that we never really needed them in any case. After all the coral reefs are bleached and dynamited, poisoned quite long ago, it is simply one less pointless eco-issue over which they will still have to argue. After all the small sanctuaries filled with roads and stores and homes, at least that mindless and frenetic pace of change must finally begin to slow. After all the resources have been plundered, transported, and consumed, we will hand carry our water in a wasteland we are too poor to even try and heal. After all the snow that falls is simply lousy with fire retardants and such, we can scold our little children as they try to catch the flakes upon their tongues. After all the forests become simple assets on corporate balance sheets, they will finally begin to pay their way in freedom's scheme of things. After all the costly giant hardwoods are cut down and hauled away, it then makes a lot of sense to simply slash and burn and grade the rest. After all the land is paved over and plotted out by giant yellow caterpillars, the rains can wash our unchecked oily residues straight into the streams. After all the quiet, unspoiled places filled with noise and smoke and litter, wackos can then search elsewhere for the peace that once filled the air. After all the wildlife is driven off, shot, burned out, or poisoned, the roaches, rats, mosquitoes, and flies will remain behind to comfort us. After all the kids have brains full of lead and mercury and lungs full of diesel fumes, welfare mothers need not worry about the rich having all of the advantages. After all the native plants are extinguished by rapacious invasive weeds, good old weak and thirsty non-native bluegrass will seem like a damn fine thing. After all the factories are abandoned and their jobs sent overseas, who can still afford the cheaper imports at the new Walmart right next door? After all the engineering is outsourced to geeky losers off in foreign lands, our poor children need not learn their stupid math or junky science anymore. After the only jobs are with the government and poverty is the norm, we will live as those far away had done before our jobs went over there. After all, the smarter people simply give up on having children. Who will pay for the schools and where will the teachers come from? After all, the western highways offer corporate fast food every couple of miles. We can marvel in sterile safety at the untamed beauty of those desert skies. After all, the rivers carry only chemicals, grease, sewage, and fertilizer for years. The times will be less contentious because no one will remember anything was ever different. After all the oil is gone and commerce comes grinding to a depressionary halt, it will then be quite pointless and far too late to lay the blame on politicians or big oil. After all of Africa cast off its racist, extractive, corrupt, and colonial legacies, pigs will flutter off like puffy butterflies upon their newly sprouted wings. After all our days are squandered and we haven't even had time to read our bills, we will saddle any generations yet to come with a heavy long-term debt from birth.